everybody, welcome to Glass Onion on John Lennon. And today I'm delighted to have back on the programme someone who I've worked with a lot on his various podcasts and my various podcasts, Scott Phipps. How are you, mate?
Good morning, mate. Very well. Looking forward to this one in particular.
Yes, we're going to have to rein each other in here. I think. Quite a big year. Big year for you as well. For any particular reason?
Oh, only the fact that I was born right near the beginning of it, mate, yeah.
Right. Can you tell us the date so we can work out what the Beatles were doing then?
Well, it was February the 8th. We're talking sort of like in a month or two's time, I think. Lennon and Ono and all that sort of activity.
Yeah, well, it was about a week after the Rooftop. Don't know if everyone knows this, but they kind of started recording Abbey Road almost immediately after the Rooftop.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that the main sessions were sort of June, July, but yeah. I think they were doing I Want You, She's So Heavy. Yeah, so a special year for you. Just in case people haven't heard your previous appearances on my shows and mine on yours, just tell us about your podcasts, please.
Oh, it'll have to be very quick. I mean, the one that started it all off was The Stinking Paws, which is just a general movie review podcast. That one's a bit free and easy. Myself, a couple of friends get together, usually over a few beers, and we review classic and not so classic movies. 8 years now, 150 plus episodes. It's very few and far between now. That one seems to be more a monthly, 6 weekly type affair. The one that brought me to your attention, mate, was Rainbow Valley. My 60s documentary podcast. Hits, headlines, news events, personalities. As I describe it, it's the decade that shook the world. And as we go on later on today, we'll find out that 1969 was possibly the year of the decade that shook the world. You know, there's so much going on at the tail end of that decade. There's a wealth of content out there, and it's not just music and it's not just movies. It's just the news events and the stuff that happened and the progress and the whole change in attitudes. You know, it starts off as the birth of liberation. You know, sexual revolution starts at the beginning, and it ends up, as we'll probably be talking about, on a massive tragic note in the December of 1969, you know, and the death of the hippie sort of thing.
Absolutely. The symbolic and the actual death of the 60s.
Yeah. And it's just a fascinating snapshot that I do. And I try to make them a good couple of hours in length because I did one on Matt Monro and Dusty Springfield and Tammy Terrell. And I like those to be a good couple of hours long because I don't want to sort of gloss over the history of these guys. It's not just these, you know, this is their chart hit, this is the I like the full life story biography type element. But then I've also done things like, you know, can you imagine trying to do a documentary on the JFK assassination? Now, if I was to go down the route of all the conspiracy theories, I'd have a podcast that was, you know, going on for years and years and years. So I try and pick a side view of some of the events. So I focused on Abraham Zapruder, who was the guy that took the 20-odd seconds of movie footage.
Yeah, that was a great one, yeah.
That one I enjoyed. I really got into that because there's a story that people don't know. People think they know the JFK story because they've seen from, you know, Oswald's point of view or what Jack Ruby was doing on the day. But Zapruder was there, just this innocent bystander that just happened to be a bit of a camera nut and filmed possibly the most watched home movie in the world.
Of course, and he was a tailor, wasn't he?
He was. He was just down the road from the book depository, as he had a shop there. And the story of how the FBI took the film and you know, and all the subsequent selling of it. And it became a burden, basically, because of how much money the actual original was worth. He died a broken man because of the financial burden.
And you got some extremely hot evidence. Yeah, unfortunately, your life's probably not going to go too well. Anyway.
Very quickly, there's Real Britannia, which is British movies. You've appeared on a couple of those. You're due to appear on a couple more, but that is just everything from carry-ons to kitchen sinks. And I am one of the co-hosts of the official Talking Pictures TV podcast, which I've been doing for a couple of years now as well, which is really great news for me.
Fantastic. You did a Rainbow Valley on one of the events of this year, but we're not going to tell the audience yet. We'll work up to that.
Okay.
Yeah, this is going to be longer. I didn't actually tell you this is part 1 of 5. I wasn't going to spring that on you straight away. No, we will see how it goes, because I remember the first time you were on Glass Onion, we were going to do 1972, the imagined film of 72, and then the imagined film of 88. And we naively said, well, we'll get together for an hour and a half and knock those two off.
Yeah, easy.
And obviously the whole time was spent on the first one. But for listeners who are new to the podcast, you were on, you did the Nowhere Boy episode.
I did.
That was fun. That was about a year and a half ago. And then actually, as a bonus, I was on your show to do How I Won the War, which obviously had John Lennon in don't believe the front cover that he was the star of that film.
Absolutely not.
He just popped up every 10 minutes with a sort of a witticism.
Very good film, actually. People should go back and watch that.
I remember at the time we were saying it would probably benefit from repeated viewings, because I found it a bit exhausting. There were almost too many ideas and too many quite subtle things going on.
It's Richard Lester, and recently we did an episode on Real Britannia about Robin and Marion, which he directed, Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn. And he's a very strange director. When you look back at Hard Day's Night and the Musketeer movies, and it's just a bizarre combination of stuff that man came out with. And as you say, I think his brain was so full of ideas, and he's trying to get them all into a 90-minute movie. And he was a big fan of the surreal and, the wacky side of things as well. And it's definitely worth looking back at any of the Richard Lester stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we have got lots to cover. So what we're going to do, this was a series that I haven't been doing too much recently, but around the beginning of the podcast, I was doing this John Lennon in series. The thing that really stands out, this is really... I was born in 75, but this is really my era. I fell in love with the 60s, obviously predominantly the Beatles in the late 80s, in my sort of early teens. And, it's such a cliche to say born in the wrong era, but these kind of years that we've been doing or were doing more, the events are just so incredible, and there are just so many. When we get to the films and the albums, it's just ridiculous. So we won't labour it too much, but... let's start with the events of the year. So do you want to give us like the biggies, especially the one that you covered on Rainbow Valley, and then I'll mop up a few of the lesser known ones perhaps. Let's do it that way.
I think there's 4 or 5 that we need to touch on at least, yeah.
So go for it.
Are we doing this chronologically, or shall I just throw possibly the most major news event of the year in straight away?
Throw them at me, go on.
Well, we got the moon landing, Apollo 11.
That was July, yeah.
In July. We've got Woodstock, which was in August.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the Altamont disaster in December of this year. And somewhere in between, we're going to probably talk about death of Brian Jones, I think.
Sure, yeah. And the Manson murders as well.
Manson murders, the Krays got in prison this year. There was so much going on in the 60s. And suddenly nature decided, hang on a minute, we haven't finished yet. Let's just cram a few more bits into the last 6 months of the decade to make it even more interesting. It's incredible, absolutely incredible year.
Yeah, I wonder if when I was in Madrid, I met a couple of musicians who were far more sort of 70s centric. There was a guy whose relationship with The Clash was basically like my relationship, or probably your relationship with the Beatles. This sort of all-encompassing thing. And he would maybe take the 70s and say that was more tumultuous. But I would say objectively, there's something about the 60s. You just can't deny the sweeping changes. If you compare sort of 60, well, say 62, 63 to about 68 or 69.
Yeah.
If you took a 5-year span of any other part of history, perhaps apart from the world wars, I can't imagine this as much crammed in here, like in terms of society changing.
The whole thing of the sexual revolution kicks in 61 with the Lady Chatterley trial, and it's all the obscene publication things, and teenagers are still a relatively new thing at the birth of this decade.
Yeah.
The baby boomers from 1946 are now heading into their 20s, becoming young adults throughout this decade. And of course, it's a revolution. It's a definite revolution. And this is why I find this whole 10-year span so fascinating, because, as you say, there was just so much crammed into it.
And again, maybe I'm biased because I love the 60s music, but when we get to that, I just blown away, like how much amazing music. And the thing about it was that, of course, that people would have been buying vinyl. And it was also the era of... arguably it was the era of the birth of the album as an idea rather than a collection of songs. But then think about the album covers as well.
Works of art.
I would say they are, yeah.
And I think it's either 67 or 68. I think albums start to outsell the single sales.
Yeah.
Is it round about
67, then? Perhaps. Can't remember exactly. Yeah, but definitely around then, yeah. One thing I want to ask you about, because you did do a Rainbow Valley on Altamont. Now, obviously, in the current climate, the sort of Black Lives Matter climate, when someone looks back on those events, they will clearly see it as a racially motivated attack. And this is really not the time to go into that.
No.
Because it's in the climate now, perhaps people jump on it a little bit too much. But when you actually watch the footage, Is it not fair to say that he was brandishing a gun?
Is there.
Meredith Hunter.
It is actually there in the footage. If you see...
Yeah, you can see it. Yeah,
the Gimme Shelter movie. And they slow it down, and there's a freeze frame of it. And you see him brandishing a gun, and then the Hells Angels jumping on him. And you see, you actually, if you really closely get some really great photo, like stills that have been cleaned up a bit, you can see the knife that goes into his neck.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating story. Before I sort of looked into it, you knew the story, somebody was killed at a Rolling Stones concert. That's all I thought it was, the Hells Angels were brought in as security guards. That was the whole encapsulation of what we knew. But when you just go into how it came about, this whole Stones wanting to do a free concert, to round off the decade, because Brian Jones had died a couple of months before, they'd done the Hyde Park thing. But then you go into it with the lawyers and the organisation of how it tried to come about. You get their lawyer, Marvin Belli, who was the biggest sort of celebrity lawyer of the time, and he's trying to organise everything. And there's a change of venue at the last minute, and it ends up at the Altamont Speedway track, isn't it? I think it's a Speedway track. And of course, the security, famously, it was Sonny Barger and the Hells Angels. And if you watch the footage, it's a complete mess. The stage was only 3 feet off the ground, pretty much in places. And Hells Angels were just standing on the stage or sitting on the stage, pushing people away. They parked all the bikes in front of the stage as some sort of barrier. And of course, problems started when people were touching their bikes. That's one thing you don't do, you don't touch an Angel's bike. Yeah. And people were being beaten with pool cues and bricks and all this sort of stuff. And it's a miracle that nobody else died. There was actually 2 deaths and a birth. Right. Nobody ever talks about it. Just
to level it out slightly.
Yeah. Somebody died in a car accident right towards the end as well. And somebody drowned. There was 3, actually. There was 3 deaths at Altamont.
Of course, I'll direct listeners. I'll put it in the show notes. Your fantastic episode about that. One of the guys from Jefferson Airplane got lamped by one of the Hells Angels as well. I think it's fair to say there was a lot of, they called it bad acid. I don't know. Maybe any acid is bad if there's just hundreds of people on it. But it seems like, I don't know if you found this in the research, but there were lots of people on LSD, and you don't have to know much about LSD to know that if you were on a trip, seeing lots of people being violent is just going to throw you off on a very bad trip. I don't know what, I think I remember reading there was other substances going around, but the image I have is of the Stones piling into their helicopter, I suppose it was it, or small plane, just saying, let's get the fuck out of here. And just, I can imagine them just kind of coming off the ground and just watching it from the plane or the helicopter.
Well, it was either, I think it was the Grateful Dead or Jefferson Airplane left early. They were begging for a helicopter to return and take them away because they knew something was going to happen.
Oh, God.
And then there's footage of the helicopter in the Gimme Shelter documentary as it goes over the crowd, basically, and they're fleeing. They're getting away. Yeah, it's frightening. When you look at it, I mean, you've been to a few live gigs. You've played a few live gigs in your time, mate, And it is just breathtaking at how badly organised the whole thing was. Dangerously so.
Yeah. I suppose the only slightly comical thing about it, I don't want to make fun of anything that happened here because it was a tragedy, but you got Mick Jagger with this sort of really, I hate that sort of faux American accent. So he's going, "Hey man, we gotta cool it. We gotta get those cats off the stage."
It is. It's just like, love and peace, man. It's still like, because he's desperate to have his own personal Woodstock. That's what it all is, And it's just backfired into. This is what we were sort of hinting at the beginning. August, peace and love in Woodstock. And it's not necessarily the birth of the hippie generation, but it's the epitome. It's the one people always turn to when you talk about the hippie generation. Oh, Woodstock, man, And all that love and free, concert, the free love atmosphere that was going on there turns into hell at the end of the year, not 4 months later.
Absolutely. I mean, you couldn't have scripted it almost. The death of the 60s coming in December 69.
Yeah, incredible.
I mean, we reviewed for one of your shows with Dale and I was thinking like it's a bit on the nose to set it in 69 and say this is the end of the 60s, but this is almost proof that kind of works.
Absolutely.
We can talk about Woodstock only really to say that even the sort of revisionist history, you'll probably find there was a couple of scuffles or something. There were a couple of deaths at Woodstock.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, for what it was, for this enormous gathering, it seems like it went off quite well. Would you say that?
It was so much better organised. There's a couple of great documentaries out there that examine the background scenes, and there's also, the official film, which runs at 4 hours long, which is an absolutely fascinating. It's one of my favourite documentaries of all time.
Me too. There's even like about an hour and a half of other footage as well that's out there somewhere.
Yes.
God,
yeah.
Unbelievable.
The Janis Joplin footage, which is removed from the official film, is incredible, because the first Rainbow Valley that I did was on Janis Joplin, and as I was looking into what happened, because I knew she was at Woodstock, but the footage was never there. Basically, she was kept waiting for like 9 or 10 hours and didn't appear on stage until 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, something like that. So you're Janis Joplin at the biggest hippie festival in the world. What do you do backstage for 9 hours? She was a complete mess. And it was at her insistence that footage was never used. Go back and find it. It's amazing. I mean, I think she still pulls off an incredible performance, even though she's completely off her tits.
Was it Monterey where she got discovered?
Monterey was the one where it really came to the world's attention that this woman was absolutely fantastic. She was bullied at school, she wasn't a particularly pretty child. She had a really rough teenage years, and she sort of ran away from Texas to LA and found herself and sort of became a musician there. And it's another fascinating story. This is what I said, the wealth of stories in the 60s, just from ordinary people. Everybody was an ordinary person at one point, and how they developed into cultural and style icons,
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because I had my mum on Glass Onion kind of in the early days, and there's a famous David Bailey quote. I think it's from Desert Island Discs or some interview he did. He said, the 60s was the 60s, but only for about 200 people.
Yes.
He was talking about London, I think. But I had Dan Richter on the show, and he said, no, there were gatherings of a few thousand in London. It's a sort of confluence of hippies, anti-war, free love, confluence of all those things.
We mentioned it, mate. We said a bit on a previous podcast that it wasn't all Carnaby Street and loom pants. It was just a normal 10 years for most people. They go to work 9 to 5, and have the weekends off. They wouldn't be smoking pot or sitting round in bedsits, listening to the latest album. They would be hard-working people just getting on with life, especially 20 years after the war. It's still, a country was still in recovery for a lot of people.
But going back to what you're saying, though, it's still significant because the movers and shakers made it, change society
exactly,
rather.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps I shouldn't say that. I think the ordinary people do in a way shape society. Like we kind of vote with our dollar, or
Well, there was a big major shift in the political scene as well. With changes of government and stuff like that. So there's lots of stuff going on. As I say, it's political, it's entertainment, it's scientific. Breakthroughs in the science world. All of that sort of stuff was going on. Innovations everywhere.
Yeah. All right. With the moon landings, I'm not sure. I mean, there's so much been said about it already. Is there anything that you and I could say on this Sunday morning that hasn't been heard before?
I think nowadays people don't realise just how big an event that was. Because the BBC's footage has been wiped. Did you know this? It's all gone, apart from about 10 or 12 minutes. One of the most massive news events of the 20th century, of all time, and the BBC wiped it, So we have to rely on Walter Cronkite and the guys over at ABC or wherever to give us the footage that they used. For me, I mean, the whole of that Apollo team, not just Apollo 11, but the build-up to it throughout the 60s, they are modern-day explorers, a bit like your Captain Scotts or your Walter Raleighs and all that sort of thing, going into the unknown. Can you imagine how dangerous doing what they were doing? You're basically strapping yourself to, like, 1 million gallons of fuel and setting it alight. And Apollo 13 highlighted just how dangerous it was, and Apollo 1, which exploded on the launch pad, It was partly down to Kennedy, wasn't it, that made the vow that we would get a man on the moon before the end of the decade.
Yeah.
He made that famous speech. And, of course, up to that point, Russia was winning the space race. First woman in space, first man in space, all these things, they were the major landmarks. They were just one step ahead. And there's your conspiracy theories that say it never happened. It did happen, of course it happened. But it was a bit rushed towards the end to make it happen in 1969. And, I don't think these guys are celebrated as much as they should be. Michael Collins, who was the third member of the crew, he only passed away last year, I think it was. But, there was no major headlines about that. Even when Neil Armstrong died a couple of years ago, But then again, he liked to keep his life quite personal. He was a very private man. Not like Buzz Aldrin. I mean, you see Buzz Aldrin everywhere. He's a bit of a media junkie, is Buzz Aldrin.
Armstrong came across a bit like the two astronauts in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
Almost personalityless, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And I don't mean that's not a bad thing, because he's essentially, he had to focus on his job.
He had a job to do. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, exactly.
People don't realise that it was a groundbreaking piece of television and a groundbreaking piece of news.
Well, as you said, there's so many strands in the 60s, and the political one was, of course, the space race. It was really US against the Soviet Union. Exactly. And obviously Russia got someone into space early, as you said, and they seemed to be ahead. And then you got the nuclear build-up in the 60s as well.
The
Can't deny race. That. That was that going on.
Yep, the arms race as well.
Here's something about the moon landings. Did you know that Pink Floyd I think they were even performing live on the UK broadcast of the moon landings?
Yes, I think they were. This is the thing, because it's missing. This whole footage is completely gone. There's about 12 minutes left. That's all there is.
So they would be doing their kind of spacey Pink Floyd thing, wouldn't they?
Some really innovative producer at the BBC with some great insight. I thought, you know what this needs? This needs a bit of the Floyd, to appeal to the kids. Because don't forget, in this country, Armstrong didn't actually set foot on the moon until about 4 a.m, I think it was. So everybody got up to watch live.
Yeah, all the main things that happen, it always happens to you in the middle of the night in England. So you emerge bleary-eyed to find out what's happened. Yeah, I imagine Pink Floyd, they could have made one riff last the whole broadcast.
Can you imagine? It'd be brilliant.
Like,
one 12-hour track, yeah.
And then we had the Manson murders as well.
Yeah, that was about August time as well. That was round about the Woodstock time, I think.
Yeah, it was. I suppose the sort of misconception there is that Manson didn't actually do any of the murders. We're always told that he was orchestrating it.
Yes.
Again, there's always revisionist history, and I'm quite open to it generally. But I don't know. I suppose some things are just too dark to investigate. Although I've investigated most stuff. But yeah.
If you read the book Helter Skelter, which is the definitive version of what happened that day, or over the weeks, because it happened over a couple of days, because there was murders before that as well. It's one that I'm planning to do a Rainbow Valley episode on, and I was trying to do some research on it last year, and it's like, where on earth do we start? Do I make the focus Charles Manson? Do I make the focus of this story Sharon Tate? Or do I make it some of the Manson children? I don't know where I'm going to do this particular episode and in what direction it's going to go, because there are so many strands to it. And this is why I think we've never had a decent authoritative movie on it, because there's too many people involved and too much going on. It's not just Charles Manson, and he was a complicated character, because he was a musician, and he was involved with the Beach Boys and Terry Melcher, I think it was, wasn't he? All those guys, and he brought out albums. He was in the studios with these guys making records literally months before all this happened.
Yeah, like I say, it's one of those. It's intimidating to tackle something like that, isn't it? But I think it's interesting, the misconception. I think most people would probably think that he had actually been there doing them.
I think that's the general sort of feeling amongst people is, Manson did the murders. Yeah,
because they've been attributed to him, obviously. Okay, do you want to pick a handful of other events, and then I'll do the same? I've got a bit of a list here. Perhaps the ones that are less famous, maybe. Well, Brian Jones, if you want to talk about that, perhaps. Brian Jones, and then obviously the other concert of '69. Well, even Blind Faith played at Hyde Park, but the Stones played.
Yes.
Just one thing I wanted to say about that. There's a great film called The Stones at Hyde Park, and you really get the idea of how heady it was, just up to 500,000 people in the park.
It's the sort of thing that never happened, because there was no such thing as a stadium concert at this point. I'm trying to think what the biggest sort of arena you'd have gone to see. It was the Wembley Bowl, I think it was called, or something, before it became the arena. There was no... It was
a roundhouse, I suppose.
Yeah, there was no massive, great stadium concerts throughout the 60s. So festivals were your biggest output. And the thing that always sticks in my mind about the Brian Jones thing is when Jagger releases the Butterflies.
Yeah.
And they're all dead.
Yeah, a lot of them. That's right, yeah. Don't spoil his moment. He's reciting Shelley, isn't he?
That's it. And he's got the big white flowing sort of like shirt thing he's wearing, and especially this wonderful symbolic moment, all these butterflies being released, and they fly literally 3 feet in the air and then just die amongst all the crowd.
Yeah, he did look good though, I must say, or very striking.
See, this is the thing, is although we can laugh at it because it is quite a ridiculous memorial service, this whole thing. It is, when you look at it, it is quite a ridiculous concept, but it's a fascinating snapshot of people that were number one 2-3 years earlier and still having a relatively successful, still quite great chart success. That is not the Mick Jagger that you remember from 1963, 64. It completely evolved in the space. Was it you that was telling me, that the Beatles chart success is literally only like 6 years or something, isn't it? Or 7 years?
Yeah. Well, literally, their tenure at Abbey Road was almost exactly 7 years, which is just ridiculous. And
as I say, you look at Cavern Club 1962 to Get Back 1970 or whatever, look at the difference and the complete change in style, in music, in fashion, in attitudes of the band. They've done their growing up. Most people say they did their growing up at Hamburg, but they had to grow up over that 7-year period as well.
Sure, and with the Stones, I think if you look at Jagger and Richards, they were still quite charismatic, but Keith Richards became almost what he is now, this sort of outlaw. Well, he'll say he doesn't do drugs anymore, maybe he doesn't, but he'd become this sort of outlaw figure on hard drugs by 68, the rock and roll circus. Poor old Brian Jones had bloated through all kinds of excess, and he really just looks, if you look at him in 65, he still looks amazing with that sort of blonde Beatles cut.
He was the beautiful one out of the band, wasn't he?
I think so, yeah. And then by 68, he's a mess, and then they'd kicked him out of the band just before this concert, in fact, or just before he died, sorry.
It was just before he died. Basically, he'd given up the drugs, and the reason he was so bloated, he was bang on the alcohol. And that's what happened. He was trying to clean himself up, but he replaced one addiction with another. And
there you go.
And he just bought this new house. And the whole story is about the builders in the house, for those that don't know.
Talking about theories, I mean, that does seem very suspicious. There's been some really good stuff on that, actually.
Yeah. Stephen Woolley did a great biography of that whole 2-3 month period. I think it was called Stoned. Absolutely great movie. It just sort of scratches the surface as to what happened, because nobody knows what happened. The theory is that he had some builders in that were basically taking the piss out of him financially and just ripping him off. And the theory is that one of them killed him and threw him into the swimming pool to make it look like accidental death. And there is some evidence that leans towards it and some that completely says it didn't happen.
Yeah, and the sort of ironic thing, of course, is that he was apparently a very good swimmer.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't make it up, really, could you? I mean, rock star who's a very good swimmer dies of drowning.
And is he the first of the 27 club? I know,
unless you include some really old ones like Robert Johnson.
That's the one I was going to say.
The ones we know. Yeah. It was Brian, Jimmy, Janis, Jim.
And then Amy Winehouse.
Yeah, Kurt Cobain, of course.
Kurt Cobain, yeah.
All right. Can you give us 2 or 3 other ones?
I can give you a couple, mate.
Yeah, and then I've got a few as well.
1969, the Crays were jailed.
Oh, yeah.
For 2 separate murders that the police knew about. They were only in prison for 1 each.
Well, I know because you told me before we started recording. I'm not going to claim I knew that before. Yeah.
Bringing what was described as their reign of terror to an end. And again, it's another one of those stories where valiant efforts have been made to make movies. They really don't get it right. I mean, the one with the Kemp brothers was okay. The one with Tom Hardy, again, was okay. But anybody that's read histories, and there's more probably written about the Crays than any other crime family, true crime incident than anybody else. There's thousands of books out there. I don't think it's ever accurately been portrayed on screen, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the Kemps did all right. I love Billy Whitelaw in that film.
Brilliant. I love Billy Whitelaw anyway.
This sort of anguished mother. They had some interesting stuff there where they're actually doing the murders, and I think they cut to her at home and as if she knows what's happening.
Yeah,
it's a bit sort of artistic license, but
my
boys. Yeah.
We've got Concorde in 1969. Britain's Concorde made its first flight. Again, look at this. Is what I was saying about technology. Why haven't we still got a supersonic passenger jet anymore? Can we stop?
Well, there was that crash, wasn't there? That was the reason it was withdrawn. When was that? The early 2000s?
I think it was, wasn't it? But then you think about it, it's an airliner that was 30 years old by then. So why haven't they developed a newer version of it?
That was another interesting thing, actually, between the English and the French, wasn't it?
It was.
Similarly with the Channel Tunnel.
There was a joint effort, wasn't it, between the two nations?
Just for you, the listeners, just watch any clips of Yes Minister on some brilliant stuff on the Anglo-French relationship of unity.
It has been brought up since Brexit, hasn't it? That clip a few times.
Yeah.
I've seen.
I mean, if you go through history again, they had 100 years war, for God's sake, which was actually about 110 years.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy with the best will in the world to evolve to the point. I mean, I'm not talking about the average citizen, because most of my students are French, my English students, and I love all of them. They're all great. I haven't met anyone who conforms to any kind of stereotype of French. But anyway, this is like a return to the good old days of Glass Onion, because I used to do this in the early days.
Yeah.
We'd actually do a whole episode on the pre-John Lennon stuff, but it's fine.
On the subject of technology, this year saw the first, not necessarily test tube baby, but the first time that eggs were fertilised outside of a human body, leading to the first test tube baby, which I think was 78, I think Louise Brown. This is what I'm saying, it's just innovations as well throughout this decade that happened. Politically, Nixon was elected this year.
Yep, and the Vietnam peace talks started pretty soon after. I think I said on one of the other years we did, it's a sort of strange mixture of creation and destruction, because you've obviously got Vietnam is going on, and I think we sort of covered on previous episodes the main events like the Tet Offensive and the My Lai Massacre and those things. But the peace talks started, yes, and that was a long drawn-out affair where the Americans actually left Saigon in 1975.
Yeah, exactly.
A couple of months before I was born. And again, interesting to see the pictures of Kabul and to say, well, has it really moved on? Because we saw almost exactly the same things of Afghans hanging on to US military planes as they were leaving.
Exactly the same. Yeah, one of the things I found out while I was doing some research for the Rainbow Valley podcast, there is no official start date for the Vietnam War. You know, like people can say, like, war was declared in September the 3rd, 1939. You know, that was when Britain entered the war. Because of what was going on, I think, in Laos and other countries all around there, it was just bubbling around for, like, months and years. And there is no historical official start to when the Vietnam War actually began.
Well, I mean, you could almost say, this might seem ridiculous to some people, you could almost say it was around the 1860s or something when the French first got involved. Because in the end, that's kind of how these things go, you know. I think officially the Korean War hasn't ended. That's
another amazing fact. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's still going on, isn't it? Yeah.
But I think the French were in the sort of modern era of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam's basically struggle for independence. You got the 50s, so The Quiet American by Graham Greene was about that era, which is interesting. And then I guess the troop escalation was really 64 to 65, just after Kennedy died.
It would have been, once Johnson came into power. That's right.
Can I just give you a few other ones here?
Yeah.
This is quite significant, in fact. Rupert Murdoch took control of the News of the World, which I think is of huge significance, because I think it's almost the birth of the tabloid era. Now, obviously, you know, newspapers have had that mentality for a long time, but I think that's a profound change in England.
News of the World wasn't a tabloid, really, was it, back then, as far as I remember? It was a lighter paper.
I might be wrong about this, but I think 1969 is the year when he took control, where it became...
Yes, exactly. That's what I mean. You're quite right. And tabloids as we know them. Because I think The Sun actually first got published in 1969 as well.
Yeah. Because isn't the News of the World basically the Sunday version of The Sun?
It was at the time, yeah. Definitely throughout the 70s and the 80s it was, because there was no Sunday version of The Sun. I'm sure The Sun was published 68 or 69, yeah.
I think it might be 69, yeah, you're right. Jim Morrison was arrested in Miami. Again, I've read a lot about this. Makes me laugh how afraid we're supposed to be of him possibly exposing himself. Jim Morrison's dick is something to be terribly afraid of.
Oh, bless him.
That's quite amazing. That's worth reading more about. Sirhan Sirhan, the CIA mind-controlled assassin. Oh, sorry, wrong podcast. Was convicted for assassinating RFK.
Also, while you're talking about the Kennedys, there was Chappaquiddick this year.
Oh, yeah.
Where Edward Kennedy in the limo and the young girl gets killed, she drowns. And again, was he driving? Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, with RFK, you know, he was against the Vietnam War and for civil rights. So it stands to reason that a Palestinian stable boy would take it upon himself to kill him.
Yeah.
Anyway,
again, if I was to do a Rainbow Valley, where do I start? I have to take it from a different angle, because there's so many conspiracy theories on that assassination, you know.
I mean, I take, you know, I don't really ever talk about the moon landings. I've never investigated it. But things like RFK, I will debate anybody about that. And JFK, and then even Martin Luther King as well, but that was the previous year. Anyways, Ho Chi Minh died.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
And we have to remember as well, don't know if you saw any of the Ken Burns, it's like a 10-part Vietnam thing. Some of it was good, but again, I've studied that war a lot. And you have to remember that the Viet Cong, which is the name they're always given, which is a derogatory name. They're actually, the real name is a Viet Minh.
Right.
In the West, we choose to call them Viet Cong. You know, that was a struggle for independence. You know, you can't just write them off as the communists, as Ken Burns did. But he was obviously the father of that struggle, Ho Chi Minh. He died. Which TV show, Scott? I don't even need to ask.
There's
whether
two.
You know. Which one came out in October? Which one?
That's got to be Monty Python.
Absolutely.
And then earlier in the year, Sesame Street. Still going.
Right.
Like me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Monty Python was October, I think, wasn't it? And that was 50 years ago. I keep thinking it's longer than 50 years. I'm older than 50, for God's sake. And
I probably should mention the Beatles at some point.
What were they up to?
Talk. Of course, there is that lovely quote that Terry Gilliam quotes George Harrison as saying, you know, the spirit of the Beatles passed to Python.
True.
Beatles effectively ended in 1969. Not officially, but first regular colour TV broadcast on BBC and ITV.
Yes, that would have been about now as well. That's right, yeah. Technology again.
Absolutely. And then just a couple more for the football fans. Pele scored his 1,000th goal, which is quite mind-blowing if you actually think of it. 1,000 goals.
Let me think, because he was in the 58 World Cup, so he'd been playing at least 11 years at this point.
Yeah, but that's nearly 100 goals a year.
Yeah.
I think Wikipedia's got somewhere's got every single goal, but I'm not going to take away from him anything at all, but he played in the Brazilian league, and unfortunately we never saw him in the European League or what became the Champions League, so perhaps we'll never quite know the total greatness, but you can't really argue with 1,000 goals. And he wasn't even a striker as well. He was sort of a midfielder / striker, but anyway. And then the final one, this is a John Lennon one, I'm going to throw it in here. Apparently he was offered the role of Jesus Christ by Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber for their upcoming presentation of Jesus Christ Superstar. And if you think about the way he looked, I mean, he wouldn't have had to put any kind of costume or fake beard on, would he?
It would have been perfect casting, mate. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, well, there is an interesting thing. I haven't seen this, but in one of the John Lennon biographies, apparently he drew a picture of Jesus while he was even at primary school, because he was you'll know this, he was very well advanced. You know, he learned to read using the Liverpool Echo, local paper, and he had artistic cartoon talent from a young age. And apparently he drew this picture of Jesus while he was at Dovedale Primary School, and it looked almost exactly as he looked without the glasses, of course, in 1969.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Very striking. Any other news events?
North Sea oil was found. Obviously was a massive sort of income for the country throughout the 70s. For us children of the 80s that remember Live Aid and the reason behind it, which was the Ethiopian famine. In 1969 it was the Biafran famine, which was possibly even on a worse scale than the Ethiopian one. It was a horrific turn of events. It was all due to war out there, wasn't it? So, was it Nigeria? I think Nigeria involved.
Nigeria and Biafra, yeah. Because John mentioned that when he gave us back his MBE, didn't he?
Yes. You know, we had all of this going on.
It's funny how some things get remembered and some don't. Things like the Armenian genocide.
Yep.
You know, statistically, it's just, it's horrendous. Maybe just a couple more, because we'll probably have to move on at some point.
Here's an interesting one for you, mate. In December this year, it was announced that a sterilisation clinic for men will open in Birmingham early next year and enable a simple vasectomy operation to be performed under local anaesthesia for around £16.
Bargain. Well, I suppose £16 was a lot more then, wasn't it?
I was hoping he was going to say, that's a snip.
Yeah. There was one other one, actually, regarding Vietnam. There was a Vietnam moratorium day in November. I've got candlelit march and 500,000 people singing Give Peace a Chance.
Wow, 500,000.
And I don't know if that was the one where Nixon was reportedly crying in the White House.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I remember that was in one of the movies or something I saw,
Again, it could be apocryphal, who knows, but it's a good story. But Pete Seeger was there and apparently hadn't heard of Give Peace a Chance, which is quite bizarre. They've been out a few months. I think we talked about that one of the times you were on. Petula Clark was singing along there.
It's Petula Clark, bless her.
But unfortunately, I'm really going to burst a bubble here. Apparently, she didn't get on the recording because they were singing so out of time. It's not professional singers that they actually re-recorded it. I should have told the listeners to block their ears there before I said that. Just amazing. I mean, Give Peace a Chance, I think, totally holds up. You know, it's not musically complicated, but my God.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just mention one more thing?
Sure.
It wasn't a major year for sport, as we've sort of touched on here, but this would be of particular interest to you. At the end of August, Rocky Marciano died.
Ah, yes. I didn't write that one down. Yeah, absolutely. The only heavyweight champion to retire undefeated.
Yes.
And in fact, a few months earlier, because Ali was in exile, we all know that one.
Yeah.
You know, he was away for 3 years? 3 years. 3.5 years.
Yeah.
You can watch this on YouTube. It's quite bizarre. They'd done a computerized fight, which had 3 different endings because they fed the stats into a computer to try and find a good ending of who was the greatest.
Yeah.
And they actually acted it out, and it's quite comical.
That's the plot to Rocky Balboa.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Don't they do a computer-generated Sly Stallone or something, which brings him out of retirement or something?
Yeah, they do a computer thing because Rocky has been out of fighting in the story.
Yeah.
And there hadn't been a Rocky film for 15 years, so they had that idea. So that was a nicked idea. Anyway. Right, so with births, I made the mistake of going to Wikipedia, and like I was saying to you off mic, there's like 100 of just A.
Yeah.
But here are some musical legends born in this year. You ready for this?
Yep.
Jay-Z, Mariah Carey, Jennifer Lopez, Marilyn Manson, Dave Grohl of Nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
Good year for rappers, yeah. So you had Jay-Z, as I said, Ice Cube, and P. Diddy. And then with actors, just got a few here. Jennifer Aniston, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Edward Norton, who's one of my favourites.
Yep.
He's a brilliant actor. Michael Sheen, who's played everyone from Tony Blair, who else? Kenneth Williams, Brian Clough. Yeah. Have you got any ons for births? Because it's just so many. It's a bit.
No, not births. I think you've covered everybody there. I mean, I knew the Jennifer Aniston, Jennifer Lopez one.
Scott Phipps, of course.
Well, I'm there as well, yeah. But it's just that I look at those two particularly gorgeous women and think, oh my God, they're the same age as me.
Yes, but I bet they've had more work done than you, let's be honest.
They haven't had the stress and the worries that I have, mate.
All right, deaths. So Brian Jones, Sharon Tate.
Judy Garland was this year.
Oh, yeah, Judy Garland, yeah.
We've got
Rocky Marciano.
Rocky Marciano. We've mentioned. It was a plane crash, wasn't it, Rocky Marciano?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
You've mentioned Ho Chi Minh. Jack Kerouac died this year.
Oh, yeah.
And another Kennedy, the father, Joseph P., died this year. Senator. Well, he was a senator, wasn't he, at one point? The author of Just William, Richmond Compton, died.
There's a connection because John Lennon loved those books.
Did he?
Because he was a sort of a... John Lennon wasn't perhaps as much of a fighter as people said when he was a child. He was more of a kind of a, what's the word, an imp, or what's the word? Very mischievous. So he loved Just Williams. A scamp, yeah, there you go, or a scally.
A scally, definitely.
Yeah. There's a connection. And then Kerouac, of course, a big connection. The Beats. Well, I suppose more on Dylan, but yeah, that's a literary thing.
Yeah, so he died 69. Another author, John Wyndham, Midwich Cuckoos and all that sort of thing. General Eisenhower died this year.
Oh, yeah. I've sent you a list of films. Go on, you bosh through a few and then I'll bosh through a few.
Okay, movies this year. Big year for James Bond this year. Brand new James Bond. On Her Majesty's Secret Service, George Lazenby. For many, many years, history did not treat it kindly, but it is now generally regarded as one of the better Bonds.
It's also very interesting because it's a massive outlier because, again, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, don't listen now. Because he gets married and then it's got an unhappy ending. His wife is shot.
Indeed.
Which is really quite amazing if you think about it. If you think about it in the context of the whole series, you would have come out of the cinema thinking, God, blimey, what happened there?
Yeah, and then you're expecting, like, okay, I can't wait for the next George Lazenby movie because how's he going to react to that and get his revenge? But he never got the chance.
Yeah, they went goofy, didn't they? Because I actually like Diamonds Are Forever. I think it's a bit subjective because I think I recorded it off the telly and watched it 100 times because it was such fun. But I'd never thought about this. Diamonds Are Forever was Connery almost doing Roger Moore.
Yeah.
Because it was very goofy and a bit silly. They went in a whole different direction, didn't they? We could talk about this another time, but I think with the Daniel Craig, they have made a bold attempt to not only reboot it, but change it a little bit. They made him sort of vulnerable didn't they?
I think this latest one, has successfully tied the others all together, I think. And they're a standalone series, obviously, because it is, just the one actor playing the character. But it works together as a whole, I think, and I quite enjoyed it.
The problem for them, unfortunately, is that this is a thing. Terence Young, who directed the first one, he said that Orson Welles watched Dr. No, and we know how insightful Orson Welles was. Orson Welles said, that was brilliant. Everyone is going to catch up with you and nick all your ideas. And that's kind of what happened. Unfortunately, now, I did enjoy that last film, and I really liked Casino Royale, the Daniel Craig one.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, everyone catches up, don't they?
Exactly.
And it's never going to be as unique as it was in the Connery and Moore days.
No, they've got to come up with something now. If whoever takes over the role of Bond, it has got to be something like Craig was completely different. It was a complete let's take a step away from all of that goofiness and just they rebooted it from the beginning. I've always said, and I said this when Craig took over, what they should have done and what they should do now is go back to the 60s and the 50s and set them back in that sort of time. So he's not relying on mobile phones and so many gadgets, and just bring it back to the heart of the story that Fleming wrote about. It won't be probably as appealing to the mass market, but it'd be interesting to see proper, adaptations of the novels.
Yeah, well, based on the events of No Time to Die, which again we will not spoil because some people may not have seen it, I think we might have an idea of who it's going to be, don't we? But we're not sure. But, not sure.
Yeah, I don't think it will be. But
okay, yeah, fair enough. Go on, give us a couple more, and then I've got a few more as well.
It was a big year for John Wayne this year. True Grit came out, and it was the movie that won him his Oscar.
That's right. Yeah.
Also, another good year for another Western. The Wild Bunch, Peckinpah, came out this year.
And then you've got that's sort of the how can I describe it? The bastard brother of Butch Cassidy.
Well,
it's incredible to have two westerns that are so different, but I love both of them. I think for different reasons.
Yeah. See, but then Butch Cassidy came out this year as well. A great year for westerns. Revisionist westerns.
But I mean, couldn't get more different, really.
No, absolutely.
But obviously, with all the tropes and. Little bit of trivia. My man Marlon was actually, I think it must have been the Paul Newman role he was offered for Butch Cassidy.
All right.
How about that?
Well, sticking with westerns, there was also a musical western this year, Paint Your Wagon, Clint Eastwood, Lee Marvin. Yeah. And Cowboys, still running through the feed, Midnight Cowboy, which won Best Picture this year, didn't it?
Yes, the first X-rated film to win, and that is in my top 10 of all time. And here's an idea that kind of is a western on bikes, is Easy Rider, of course.
Yeah.
Very Western tropes, I must say.
This is what you and I talk about pretty much every time we get together. the Easy Rider Raging Bull period.
Yes.
That didn't actually sort of start at Easy Rider. It was probably a little bit before, possibly.
Yeah, I'd argue Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde, exactly. As we always say, we think that's the birth of that period that we adore. But Easy Rider, I mean, I hadn't seen it until fairly recently. It had just been one that I think I saw far too young and had just washed over me. I watched it when I was about 12. And it didn't mean a thing to me. It might even have been on Movie Drone when I watched it. But we reviewed it 5, 6, 7 years ago for the Stinking Paws podcast. And what a great movie. Even the ending that people don't talk about, which is a bit of a shocker. Absolutely fantastic film. And just again highlighting the shift change in the space of 10 years. When you look at the movies in 1960, 61 compared to what's coming out now in 69, it's an incredible look at the difference in a Western, say, in 1960 compared to the Westerns we just spoke about here.
And I suppose, I think Fonda and Hopper both came out the sort of Roger Corman stable, didn't they? Because Roger Corman's very unheralded. He was a producer, wasn't he? I think it's Wild Angels, and that's where you get that. We want to be free. That Primal Scream.
Oh, yeah.
One of their songs. Yeah. It's actually, they took the actual dialogue from the film. So, yeah. I don't think that's going to be everyone's cup of tea, Easy Rider, obviously, but if you love that era, it's just wonderful. Phil Spector's in it at the beginning, of course.
He is. I mean, if you've got an interest in what we've been saying about Altamont and Woodstock, it's a great sort of companion piece that fits in amongst all of that.
And then you've got a couple of wonderful Jack Nicholson, that speech he does about how people don't actually want freedom. They think they do, but they don't. Yep. That's a fantastic speech.
No, so I always forget Jack Nicholson's in it.
Yeah, he's kind of un-Jack-like in a way. He's a bit Jack, but not quite what he became. And, of course, for alcoholics and heavy drinkers around the land, when he has that first tot of whiskey. It's like brilliant.
Man after my own heart. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering, they probably did use real alcohol and real pot in those days, didn't they?
Of course they did. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm not even going to question that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when they go to Mardi Gras, I think they did actually do acid, and that whole bit is just astonishing. It's sort of amateur filmmaking used as a strength. And Peter Fonda's weeping at a grave, and in fact, I think his mother had died. So again, it's for real, wasn't it? It's method acting, basically.
Because that whole scene in the cemetery, when I first watched it, appeared a bit tacked on. But then when you watch it and you think, no, that actually fits, that works well in the context of where we're going with this movie as well towards the end.
Yeah, but it's wonderful, like guerrilla filmmaking, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I just watched a few other ones. We had, it wasn't Woody Allen's first film, but it was the first real Woody Allen film, Take the Money and Run.
Oh, was that this year? Because also it would have been was Casino Royale this year as well?
So that was 67.
Yeah. Take the Money and Run was... Oh, that's one about the bank robber, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And they use this sort of faux documentary style.
Yeah.
It's a good one. One of Brando's best and unheralded is a film called Burn.
Okay. Don't think I
highly recommend.
Yeah.
Of course, everything pales. You know what I'm going to say. Everything pales in the fact that Carry On Camping came out this year.
To my mind, and
you're going to make a serious justification. Carry On is great art.
You know my thoughts on British movies in general. Okay, I'm I will stand from the rooftops singing the praises of British movies if they are any good. And to my mind, the Carry On series has its place in British movie history. Okay, whatever you think that place may be is entirely up to you. I still watch them. I still laugh at them. We're going through them chronologically on the Real Britannia podcast, and we're only up to Carry On Regardless, which is about 4 or 5 in. We're still on the black and white early stuff. Us being, the geeky film critics that we are on Real Britannia, we've actually identified that there was a golden age of Carry On. It doesn't deserve a golden age, but Carry On movies have a golden age. And we reckon it starts about Cleo and ends with camping. And it's strange when you think about that series and you actually can define that there's a golden age to them. Most people will say there was never they shouldn't even be spoken about, especially with today's sensibilities and all this old PC rubbish. I still laugh at them, mate, and deservedly so. It's if you don't like them, just don't bloody watch them. That's what I say.
Well, I think Cleo and a couple of others are taken quite seriously. I mean, if you look in film, I used to get those old Leonard Maltins and Halliwell, the film review ones, and I used to just pore over those.
Yeah.
And Cleo, I think, is taken quite seriously. And a little bit of a parallel, actually. I'm a huge fan of Bottom, Rick Mail and Adrian Edmondson. And I just discovered a Bottom podcast, and I'm enjoying it. It's quite good. And they were making the point, yes, it's lowbrow, but it shows a real talent to write those.
Yeah.
And you could say what you like about Carry On, but, it's like the thing with people used to say, Oasis are just copying the Beatles. And I would say, well, why don't you go and write it then? Go and write an Oasis album and make yourself £1 million.
Absolutely.
Not everyone can do it.
I was just going to mention one Beatles-related movie in 1969.
Oh, God. Magic
Christian came out this year.
I actually saw that for the first time a few months ago. Yeah, it wasn't bad. Not bad at all.
I haven't seen it again. Saw it far too young when I went through watching anything and everything I could with Peter Sellers in it, or Beatles-related stuff, And again, I was about 12 or 13, so I need to go back and watch that.
It's sort of in the tradition of Casino Royale and a film called Candy.
Yeah.
It's a sort of Anglo-American, every person you've ever heard of pops up in a cameo, and Yul Brynner has the most astonishing cameo in Magic Christian. Don't know if you've ever seen that.
I have seen that bit. It's all over the internet, mate.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but Chapman and Cleese turn up very briefly, and it's good fun. Yeah.
Joseph McGrath was the director, and the thing that I remember Joseph McGrath for, he did a lot of the writing for Peter Cook and Dudley Moore on the TV show, not only but also did a bit of the writing with them. And towards the latter half of his career, he was sort of like writing for Morecambe and Wise, and he became that sort of director, more your sitcom, light entertainment type stuff. And before we wrap up on the movies, unless you've got anything else, there's 2 massive British movies this year as well.
You do those, and I might have a couple more.
Okay. Kes came out this year, Ken Loach.
Yeah, which you reviewed with Stephen a while ago. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Yeah,
absolutely fantastic film. It just gets better every time I see it. Brian Glover just makes me laugh more and more every time I watch that movie.
And also it's got those accents. I mean, it's not just northern accents. You could say the same about London that don't exist anymore, really. I don't, well, perhaps they do. Perhaps Stephen could tell us. But
this is the thing, because...
I don't think they're as broad as they used to be.
Well, I don't know, because this is the thing, because Stephen himself is from Yorkshire. He lives in York. And it's always nice to get a different point of view when we're watching, sort of like if I pick a London gangster movie, it's interesting to see what his reaction is to it. And then when he picks something that's a bit sort of kitchen sink or it's grim up north, he's fascinated by my view of it. And he's always, wonders if I have to have subtitles, to understand Brassed Off or whatever it was we watched recently,
Call it positive stereotyping, but when I listened to that, I don't think I'd met either of you.
Yeah.
And just having his voice there, talking about Kes, it just seemed to fit perfectly.
Of course it does, exactly.
Yeah, it's not just his insights into that area, it's the accent as well.
It needs a Yorkshireman to review that movie.
But yeah, what a great film. I'm not sure that's the kind of film that would perhaps travel over the Atlantic, but you never know. I'm sure there's a niche audience for it.
Well, and this film definitely needs somebody from South London to appreciate it, because it's the crime caper, The Italian Job.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yes.
Which we reviewed on Stinking Paws recently, and Paul absolutely hated.
I've got to be honest, I'm not a huge fan, but I'm open to being swayed if I ever did review that in the future.
For Paul, he liked it as a kid. He had fond memories of it growing up. But going back to it, where he hasn't seen it for over 20, 30 years almost, it's a completely different movie and it doesn't hold. Whereas to me, who I've been watching it regularly every couple of years or throughout my life, absolutely adore it. And I'm not going to say it came to blows, but I was totally bemused by his reaction to it, because I thought everybody loved that movie.
Another British one, Battle of Britain.
One of those great epics which, Michael Caine, Laurence Olivier, and it's just a cast of thousands, isn't it?
Yeah, every British star and his dog, Robert Shaw. Who is it?
Susanna York's in it, I think. She's the female interest, isn't it?
And who's she married to in the film? Oh, no, it's Christopher Plummer.
I was going to say Christopher Plummer, yes.
Yeah. But I'm a huge Robert Shaw fan, and whenever he used to pop up in any film, he was my guy, That's why I did just listen to your review of Goldfinger. And very, very good review. Loved it. I go with From Russia with Love, and I think it's the Robert Shaw factor for me. I'm
just developing a love for those earlier Bonds that just seemed so ordinary to me when I was a kid. It's like you said, they were groundbreaking in those early days, and I'm appreciating that now. Yeah.
I had two more. A film called The Rain People, which is Francis Ford Coppola's first film.
Okay, yeah.
Pretty good, like a kind of a bit of a road movie. James Caan and Robert Duvall, who obviously we would see later in The Godfather. That's worth a look. And then a film called They Shoot Horses, Don't They?
That's Susanna York again, isn't it?
Jane Fonda film. It's a hell of an achievement to make a nearly 2-hour film on a dance-a-thon where people have to keep dancing. And there's a whole drama involved in the film. I've only seen it once, but I'll probably revisit that one. We're going to go through some of the non-Beatles, non-Lennon music. We'll leave albums to a bit later. We're going to go with singles.
Okay.
The point you were making to me is the incredible diversity.
Not only diversity, but also Beatles influence in a couple of them as well. You'll see when I read through them.
So again, you go through, you've got the number ones there, and then I'll just see if there's some other ones I'll chuck in afterwards.
Okay.
You go for it.
The first number one of 1969 was The Scaffold and Lily the Pink, which has a Beatles connection, doesn't it?
Yeah, Mike McCartney. Mike Gear, as he was there,
exactly.
Paul McCartney's brother.
Okay. Yep. The second number one, Obla Dee Obla Da by Marmalade. As I say, we're not going to talk Beatles straight away. The first two number one. And also, which is interesting, both of those singles had been number one previously, and they've left the top five and come back again in at number one.
Interesting, right.
It doesn't happen very often now, if at all.
No, I think nowadays most of the sales tend to come at the beginning, probably because of the heavy marketing.
Yeah, whereas before you'd watch a single's progress up the charts, wouldn't you, week by week until it got into the top 10. The third number one single of the year, Fleetwood Mac, Albatross.
Oh, I love it. Beatles connection there, because heavily influenced Sun King.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, they were channeling I always think of it as channeling rather than copying. You channel someone I think George Harrison said, we're going to pretend we're Fleetwood Mac playing Albatross. But the guitar sound on both Albatross and Sun King is just gorgeous.
That's right. Absolutely. Okay, now there is a dispute depending on what chart you look at, because there was a number of different charts about this sort of time. There was the Record Mirror one and the one that the BBC used and all that sort of thing. So depending on what chart you're looking at, the next two were number one when I was born. Okay, so the first one is The Move, Blackberry Way.
Yep.
Roy Wood. And then Amen Corner, Half as Nice.
Is that Paradise Isn't Half as Nice?
Paradise is half as nice as Heaven That You Take Me To, yeah.
That's it, yeah.
4 weeks at number one, Peter Sarsted, Where Do You Go To, My Lovely? Typical 60s song because it was a bit quirky and a bit different. Peter Sarsted had only one more top 40 hit, which I think was Frozen Orange Juice. He was just living off this Where Do You Go To My Lovely for like 30 years, bless him.
It's like Ralph McTell with Streets of London.
Streets of London. He was
brilliant clip from Big Train. You know, if you've seen that.
Lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something to make you change your mind. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to try a new song now.
What are you doing? I've no idea.
This one is one that
Streets of London.
Well, I just done that one. So this is a new song which I'm sure. No, I've just done that one. Just finished doing it. So this is a new song which I'm sure you'll all enjoy. And this one's called
Streets of London.
No, this song's called The Highwayman. When the man came calling, calling at my door, saw my ragged family, saw that we were poor. He said, "You come and ride with me, I'll give you golden wool." No, that wicked highwayman.
Streets of London.
And how can you tell me?
And then this is, again, the variety of music. 3 weeks at number one for Marvin Gaye. I heard it through the grapevine.
Oh, yeah. It was actually recorded in 1967, I was looking at, and then it came out a bit late, but yeah, what a classic.
What a classic. And they're also covered by Creedence, wasn't it? I think they did a marvellous version of it.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
So we then get reggae. We get 1 week at number one for Desmond Dekker and the Aces and the Israelites.
That was a Vitalite ad, wasn't it?
It was Vitalite.
It's funny how many songs you discover from adverts. Yeah, I knew that was Vitalite before the Israelites. But yeah, great song.
And I deliberately have never looked at the lyrics written down for that, because whatever I've been singing for the last 40 years to that is probably completely wrong. But who knows? We're into April, 6 weeks at number one.
Get Back.
And it's listed here as the Beatles with Billy Preston.
Yeah, the only time that ever happened.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Tommy Rowe, number one with Dizzy for 1 week.
Yeah, covered by Vic Reeves.
It was. And the Wonder Stuff as well, wasn't it? I think it was the Wonder Stuff.
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, we again got the Beatles again, 3 weeks at number one.
Ballad of John and Yoko. We will talk about that later in part two.
Absolutely.
The recording of it is quite amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Going into July, 3 weeks at number one for Thunderclap Newman.
Oh, something in the air.
Great song. Again, typical 60s. That's always on any 60s compilation album, that one.
Yeah, because it works as a song, but it's very much of the time something in the air.
Yeah.
You know, something's not right. You know, something's wrong. Yeah.
Now, when did Brian Jones die? Because we're into July now. And Honky Tonk Women hits the number one spot for 5 weeks.
He died on about the 5th of July. It was very early, 3rd or 5th, something like that.
Well, this enters the number one position on the 22nd, and it stays there for 5 weeks.
And they do a wonderfully out-of-tune version of the Stones in Hyde Park. I still think it's great, even though it's just the guitar's horribly out-of-tune. But
most of their stuff is out of tune on that concert, mate. It's just it's so cobbled together.
Well, yeah, what a classic. I would say nowadays I still think there's only a few songs that the Stones we're almost obliged to play.
Zager and Evans in the year 2525. Again, another sort of one-hit wonder, but when you go back and listen to it, you think, yeah, that is typical 60 or typical 1969. Amazing song. And we were talking about Creedence just a minute ago. 3 weeks at number 1 with Bad Moon Rising.
Fantastic. Yeah. Love it. Proud Mary was this year. I don't know if that was number 1.
It hasn't hit number 1, but I'm pretty sure it was 69 was their big year. Yeah.
Well, I mean, 2 utter bona fide classics there.
Absolutely.
Singles.
I mean, again, just as an example of the variety here, 1 week at number 1 on the 7th of October, Jane Birkin, Serge Gainsbourg, Je t'aime moi non plus.
Je t'aime. Moi non plus. Yes.
We then get a bit of country. For 1 week, Bobby Gentry, I'll Never Fall in Love Again.
Oh, I don't know that one.
It's been covered 1,000 times by 1,000 different people. You'll know it if you hear it.
Right.
We then get an astonishing 8 weeks at number 1 for a band that didn't exist.
Ooh, who would that be?
The Archies, Sugar Sugar. It was a cartoon.
Sugar?
Yeah,
Oh,
the Archies was basically a cartoon, and the song was sung by a group of session musicians.
Oh, wow.
And it's been 8 weeks at number 1. Almost heading for the Christmas number 1, but it was pipped by a 6-week run from the 16th of December.
I think I'm afraid to know what this is. The last number 1 of the 60s. Go on.
Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid. It was Two Little Boys by Rolf Harris.
Oh, dear.
When we spoke about Altamont and the death of the 60s, you know. And there we go, the final nail in the coffin, mate. There it is.
God, blimey.
It's an interesting chart when you do it that way, isn't it? It's an interesting year to see, because that sort of represents 1969. But if we were to look at top 3s and top 5s, even more variety, even more stuff. Like the crooners were still chucking out. Sinatra was still hitting the chart in 69. A lot of stuff from musicals was still there as well. You know, Broadway musicals. It's a bizarre year. If we go back to 64, that is just solid Britpop, pretty much most of it. You know, what people trying to be. But 5 years down the line, you just couldn't pinpoint, you know, country and western, musicals, hippie stuff, new age stuff, it's all here.
Yeah, we saw the same with the films, really, isn't it? Let me give out a few more, which obviously didn't get to number 1.
Yeah.
But Son of a Preacher Man by Dusty Springfield, which, again, I didn't know at all. I didn't even know existed until Pulp Fiction.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Wow, Dusty in Memphis is the classic album. That's that whole Motown influence from Dusty. She was responsible for bringing Motown over to this country, pretty much.
Yeah, I feel like that's that other 1960s, which is still great, but I would just tend to know a few singles.
Ah, right, okay.
You know, I only want to be with you and just don't know what to do with myself, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was so brilliantly used in Pulp Fiction that I just loved. I mean, it's a great song, great performance anyway, but the way it was used then was just so magically good. I mean, just listen to these. This is incredible. Pinball Wizard by The Who. The Boxer by Simon and Garfunkel.
Wow.
I don't know if this was America or Britain. Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head from Butch Cassidy. And were you telling me ages ago there's 4 or 5 different versions?
Well, there is most of those. Sacha Distel had a hit with it, but I think the one from the movie was by a guy called B.J. Thomas.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that would have definitely been a hit on one or both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
We can't go on together.
My favourite Elvis era.
That band. Oh, my God.
Well,
that late 60s band he had.
It's incredible because 68 was the comeback special. And then it goes into the Vegas years. And, you know, you're either rock and roll Elvis or you're Vegas Elvis. And I am pretty much Vegas Elvis. But then
you got sort of spiritual Elvis as well. Which
the gospel stuff I love.
Quite unheralded.
Yeah, I love all the gospel stuff.
That other side to him, that really deep side.
Yeah.
And I would say in the comeback special, he looked like an adult rather than...
Yeah.
He kind of looks like a little boy in 56.
I've worked with women that have fawned over that performance. There's one lady I particularly worked with, she said that performance, she said he is the most beautiful human being I've ever seen. She's convinced. But it's just so relaxed, that 68 comeback special. All sitting round a circle. just jamming, basically, and doing acoustic versions of Hound Dog and stuff like that. But then
it's like the first MTV Unplugged, doesn't it, really?
Pretty much. But then he does the set pieces where he does If I Can Dream, and it's got the big Elvis in the lights behind him, and, you could tell that the Vegas era is just about to start. And, Suspicious Minds and American Trilogy and all of that sort of stuff that comes out about this sort of time is just heralding a new dawn for him, which tragically only lasts about another 7-8 years.
Yeah, I think it's about 73, the slide starts, and then it's pretty harrowing after that. Yeah. In the Ghetto was also this year as well.
Exactly,
good one. We will get to John Lennon later, listeners. Give Peace a Chance and Cold Turkey this year.
Yeah.
Again, I just think utterly seminal. He Ain't Heavy is My Brother by the Hollies.
Excellent.
Space Odyssey by David Bowie.
Never heard of him.
And I just mentioned Beatles again. This is quite curious. Come Together and Something as a double A side. I mean, most Beatles fans would probably have both those songs in maybe their top 20 ever Beatles, maybe even top 10.
Of course they would, yeah.
So quite curious. It got to number 4. Perhaps they were just bringing out too many, because Get Back and Ballad on Yoko was surprisingly close to each other.
Yeah, it's strange. The single releases are pretty much, right, one's in the chart, one goes out, bring another one out. They're just bang, 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 straight after each other throughout 69. It'd be interesting to see the release dates of those if we go back to that.
I don't know why they would have done that. And in fact, I think that came out just after Abbey Road, which is something they'd never done, which is to lift 2 songs from an album, because they thought it was conning the public. Of course, nowadays conning the public's just, routine.
Again, this is what we're saying. It was like only the year before or whatever, the album sales outstripped single sales. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see exactly how many singles were released and in what sort of frequency. Yeah.
But what I love about those days is actually someone in a record company actually saying, we don't want to con the public.
Yeah, he probably only lasted a week. Yeah, he got sacked pretty much after making that statement, probably.
Yeah. We're tantalisingly close to actually getting to the Beatles, believe it or not.
It's the whole point of the story, yeah.
All we've got left to mop up here, and I don't mean that dismissively, is I would say non-John Lennon. I mean, obviously there's Abbey Road, we can mention that now, but other than that, it's non-Beatles, in fact. Just again, similar with the films, just a ridiculous amount of good albums. So I'm going to let you go first, and then I'll chime in with a few other ones.
I'll start off, Let It Bleed. The Rolling Stones was released on December the 5th. It was literally the day before the Altamont concert that Let It Bleed was released.
That's very interesting.
Bizarre, isn't it? It is the horrific year for the Stones, as we know. The Brian Jones incident and Altamont to cap it all. But it is a fantastic album. Everybody knows, that it finishes with You Can't Always Get What You Want. Give Me Shelters. And, it's incredible album. The famous cake on the cover. I'm sure Delia Smith made that cake on the cover.
Delia Smith enters the Rolling Stones' dark world of 1969.
I'm sure it is. I mean, it would have been great if it was Jane Asher, because that would have made sense. But this is long before her cake-making days.
Did she ever meet them, do we know?
Well, basically, I've just found this article. It says here, in 1969, Delia Smith was a little-known cook, and it wasn't until the 70s that she hit the big time. But she was asked by a friend to make a cake for a photo shoot and to make it gaudy. The cake ended up as the album cover for Let It Bleed. And then apparently what happened was Jagger had a copy of the album framed and presented it to Delia many years later. So I don't think she actually was involved at all with the Stones apart from making that cake.
She might have a secret 6 months in her biography.
Definitely the
Mick
dark
Jagger
side.
heroin hell.
Imagine it, yeah.
Has it ever been established whether Let It Bleed is some answer to Let It Be? Because Let It Be wasn't out, but you have to think maybe the Stones would have known a bit of what the Beatles were up to.
Never even thought of that, mate.
I've never heard it discussed by anybody.
Yeah,
anyway.
Don't know. There must be some reason for the title, obviously, because I don't think there's a track called Let It Bleed on the album.
No. But yeah, what they had going at that time, I would say from about 68 to 72 or 3.
Yeah, Exile on Main Street, a couple of albums later, up to that sort of period. Absolutely fantastic. I like the early Stones stuff, the real bluesy stuff. But I think this period, the late 60s going into the early 70s, has got some cracking albums and some cracking tracks. And then it's sort of, they never really hit that peak again. It's a great era for them. Just as the Beatles are waning, they're having a bit of a resurgence and reinventing themselves.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine the Beatles being able to do that. They had a kind of year blues. That was a bit of not a Stonesy moment, but it's that kind of silly term, but white blues, if you want to call it that. But
yeah, I mean, they were influenced by the blues in their early days, you know, Big Bill Brunsey and all of that. Like Harrison always used to refer to those guys, you know. But it was never really reflected too much in the commercial releases, was it? You know, they probably played quite a bit of it, I'm assuming, in Hamburg, but it's not reflected in what we saw on vinyl.
Weirdly, actually, I did a little guitar lesson on 12-bar blues. I was doing those at the front of some of my shows till I ran out of guitar tricks, which only took about 6 episodes. But yeah, I did one on 12-bar blues, and the only pure 12-bar blues in the Beatles canon is actually Flying.
Ah.
In terms of the chord sequence.
Really?
It's the only one that strictly follows 12-bar blues.
Wow, that's interesting. Weird. That's what I mean. So say it's not reflected in what we know.
There's bluesy elements, of course.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should carry on with these. Give us a couple more.
There's a massive one, again, but it's a group that I've never really taken to. I fully appreciate how great they are. I can see why people like them, but it's not really something I would ever really turn to, and it's Led Zeppelin 2 was released this year as well.
Oh, in fact, and Led Zeppelin 1 as well.
Was one as well the same year?
Very early in the year and then late in the year, yeah.
I think 2 is probably more notable because it's the one with a whole lot of love on it.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
But it's a group that I've got a greatest hits CD. You know, bow down to the great Led Zeppelin, and I've got that. But never been a fan as much as a lot of my friends. You know.
Yeah, well, 2 and 4 would be the ones for that early bluesy sound, and then they did acoustic album number 3, Led Zeppelin 3, and then the later ones are quite different. There's quite a lot of keyboards from John Paul Jones and string arrangements and things. Yeah, you've got a lot to discover there.
Yeah, I think I'm at that age where I would have discovered them by now. I know what I like and I like what I know. I'm that sort of attitude, mate. You know, and it's like, if Led Zeppelin haven't grabbed me by the age of 52, mate, I don't think they ever will.
Okay, what else have we got?
Quite recently on Real Britannia, we reviewed the Martin Scorsese band documentary. The Last Waltz.
Yeah.
And this year, the band's self-titled album came out.
That's right.
Fairly well established at this point anyway, the band. You know, they've been going since the early 60s. This one is notable because it's the one that's got The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down on it. And this is interesting from your point of view, mate. There's a very famous rock critic called Robert Christgau.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he hated one of their previous albums, which was music from Big Pink. But this particular album, he suggested, was better than Abbey Road.
I can't possibly pass judgment. Yeah.
No,
no, it's just very different. But it's great. Yeah,
yeah. I'd suggest to people that don't really know the band or only know The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down and those sort of things that we're more aware of. Have a little listen, especially if you like 60s music and you like this late 60s sound. The band are a lot better than most people give them credit for.
Yeah, you could almost. You don't even need to think in terms of rock necessarily as well. You could appreciate it as I don't know, is it country?
It
roots,
is almost,
roots?
Yeah, there is a lot of country roots to it. And it's just the fact that they all worked together, the 5 members of this period of time, there was 5 of them, worked so well, that, like the Beatles did, you know, as we say in Hamburg, where they just worked together as a unit. They knew each other inside out. The band, again, had been together in a similar amount of time at this point. And it's just a fantastic set of musicians.
There's a few other eponymous albums, actually. There's a Velvet Underground, following on from the Nico album.
I love that album.
It's called the Banana album. So do I, yeah. God, love it. This one's got Pale Blue Eyes, which is a big favourite.
Yep.
And then, what are the other ones? Crosby, Stills and Nash.
That's a great album. That's the debut album from them. What's it got? Judy Blue Eyes. It starts off with Long Time Gone, which was their response to the assassination of Robert Kennedy.
Oh, right.
Well, super group, isn't it? The Byrds, Buffalo Springfield, the Hollies. Who would have put the 3 of them together, you know?
Yeah, soon to be joined by Young for not too long. But,
yeah.
What was the other one? The Stooges as well, self-titled.
Yep.
Sure, there are other ones. I mean, even David Bowie. In fact, that album was originally called David Bowie.
It was, Space Odyssey,
because he'd more or less canned the first album. That had been named David Bowie originally, so that stayed with that, and then he called it Space Odyssey.
Changed the cover, completely changed the cover. Yeah, I think he had the big curly perm, didn't he, on the first album cover, and they changed it to, it's almost Aladdin Sane type picture of him without the makeup, you know, the hair's gone orange.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But there's quite a lot of gold in those early Bowie albums, maybe not the first one, although Although, I don't know, I kind of like the first one.
The first one's okay. I mean,
strange way.
He hits his stride, hunky-dory, with changes on it, and, all those poems that are set to music that he does, I didn't realise, 69, there's a lot of either turning points for established bands or starting points for people just about to make a name for themselves here. We said this, didn't we, that 69 is a definite shift in attitudes.
I wonder if subconsciously at the end of a decade people do start to sort of consolidate it somehow.
I think there's sort of
I bet that happens.
Yeah, a feeling of like new decade, new beginning thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, what else have we got here? Oh, well, Bob Dylan, Nashville Skyline.
Not one of my favourites of his, but still pretty good.
Well, Lay Lady Lay was the big one, wasn't it? It's very country. There's a lot of country going around here, and it's quite a short album. I think it's even like 29 minutes or something.
That's right. This is the one with Johnny Cash on the opening track, isn't it?
Yeah.
Girl from North Country.
You got some real gems. I actually like Country Pie. It's a real fun album, actually, and Dylan has undergone some incredible change in his voice, which he put down to giving up smoking, which I don't buy.
No.
Totally different voice.
Again, new beginnings, or, established stars just taking a slightly different road.
Mm. Just to change his voice that radically. No one's quite ascertained how he did it or why he did it. Never sounded anything like that ever again. Can I just bush through the rest of these? Just keeps coming. The Who, Tommy, of course, rock opera.
Yeah.
Just by the way, yes. The Doors, The Soft Parade. Now, this was... I would say a lot of people's least favourite Doors album. I still quite like it. It's got Touch Me on it, which is fantastic.
I love that track, yeah.
But it's sort of experimental. It's probably soft. It has a sort of element of lounge music about it at times, which could be problematic. But yeah, The Doors. Nick Drake, Five Leaves Left. I'm a huge Nick Drake fan. The Kinks, Arthur or the Decline and Fall of the British Empire.
Again, established pop artists, hitting the top 10 in 64, 65, change of direction, that started an album or two before this. The same as, Sgt. Pepper was the turning point, 67. Everybody sort of realised they've got to be trying something a little bit different. And the Kinks are still knocking out albums.
And the thing about the Decline and Fall of the British Empire, so again, they're looking back. And that's one of the things about Sgt. Pepper. I'm not going to talk about it now, but I just listened to another podcast about it, and they were saying it's this weird mixture of progressive and being young and being new and everything, but then looking back to Victorian and Edwardian times.
Yeah.
So the Kinks have always had that, I think.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Older English thing.
The Village Green, yeah.
That was last year, I think, wasn't it?
I think it was the year before. Yeah, pretty sure.
Yeah. Mm. All right. Bit of a lean year for Frank Zappa, only 2 albums.
Another one that doesn't float my boat at all, Frank Zappa. I'll try most things, mate. But then if it doesn't grab me, I don't really tend to pursue it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the thing that might change that's happened with me is if you heard one of his songs on a film that you really liked or something, it's just that moment, When I discovered Zappa, again, I wasn't into it either. And then I heard a song called I Am the Slime.
Yeah.
I thought, it's just a silly song, I Am the Slime. But it's I'm the Slime from your video, and it's all about how television is putting slime into people's heads, as in rubbish, junk.
A visionary. The man was a visionary.
No, but I mean, again, it's a frightening catalogue to take on.
Yeah,
because it's 70 or 80 odd albums.
It's like you said, only 2 albums this year. Yes,
yeah, just a bit lazy.
Can I mention one of my great pop heroines, Janis Joplin? This is the year before she died, and this is quite remarkable. She released an album this year called I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again, Mama.
Oh, yeah.
And it's notable because it's her only solo album to be released in her lifetime. Because previously, she was part of Big Brother and the Holding Company, and they released, the albums prior to her death. And her other solo album, which was called Pearl, which is the one most people know, was released after her death. It is a great album. Again, I'm sounding like a stuck record here. I'm saying a fantastic album. But Janis Joplin, absolutely fantastic. Underappreciated, I think. The voice on that woman was incredible.
Have you seen the documentary? Is it called Little Girl Blue?
Little Girl Blue.
Yeah, I forgot about her album. Yeah, you're right. Then we've got Amagama by Pink Floyd, which I think is half live and half studio. Yep. One of those in-between albums. A lot of people say they weren't quite hitting their stride, but then some people like those.
Yeah.
Some people prefer those to Dark Side. So.
Yeah.
Okay, just a few more. Leonard Cohen, Songs from a Room. I think that was about his 2nd or 3rd album. Neil Young, everybody knows This Is Nowhere.
Yep.
Joni Mitchell, Clouds.
Yes, yep.
Beef heart, trout mask replica. I think he's even more difficult to get into than Zappa, isn't he?
Yep, exactly. I've listened to the album, mate. You know, it's just like...
I'll always go back to those kind of things and keep trying. Go back to the well. And the only other one I've got is King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King. Very epic. Some epic songs on there.
Very briefly, two more just to bring to you, mate. Scott Walker, Scott 4. One of the finest voices, male singing voices ever. He was brave enough to take on sort of like Jacques Brel, you know, the French songs. There was more to it than him just being a crooner. You know, he could have been up there with Sinatra doing that sort of stuff if he wanted to, but he didn't. He still kept it edgy. And I absolutely adored Scott Walker's stuff. And very quickly, Creedence Clearwater Revival released by Country, which has got the cover of I Put a Spell on You, the Screaming Jay Hawkins. A great 60s band.
Yeah, they were, yeah. They've actually got 3 albums out this year.
There you go. They beat Zappa.
Yeah, Proud Mary we talked about before, Bad Moon Rising this year. Then they cover stuff like Good Golly Miss Molly, and did a really good cover of, what's it called? Midnight Special, actually.
Yeah.
Lodi as well, it's quite famous song.
I like Lodi, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 3 albums. I'm going to draw this to a close. I'm going to call this part 1, but this has been fantastic, really good. Our shared passion, we don't even have to pretend, do we? It just comes through anyway.
69, as we said. Things we've touched on, like Woodstock, Altamont, the moon landing. It's just peppered with other stuff that when you read between the headlines, like we said, Monty Python started, you know, Concorde took off. This is major bits, all dotted and lost amongst some of those bigger headlines. And I'm going to have another scour through some books and stuff before we meet up again, mate, and just drag out some more bits and pieces.
Okay. For the listeners, this is the end of part 1 of 2, and next time we will go through the events of the year from a kind of John Lennon perspective. Thanks for doing part 1, and we'll be back for part 2 very soon.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
If you'd like to support my work across my 3 podcasts, which are Glass Onion on John Lennon, Life and Life Only, and Film Gold, go to buymeacoffee.com/Antony Rotunno, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly or yearly subscription, which will give you early access, bonus podcast content, and extracts from the upcoming book based on the Glass Onion podcast. Thanks again for listening.